We've been continuing to monitor the political developments here in Sri Lanka, which continue to get, of course, more interesting by the day. Joining us today is a person who's, of course, been involved at the very top of the political structure here in Sri Lanka. He's none other than Professor G.L. Peiris, parliamentarian. A very good evening, Professor, and welcome to the show.
Good evening.
Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us on this program. And you are joining us at a very crucial time here in Sri Lanka when politics is just a massive conundrum that nobody seems to understand. People have continued to lose hope because of the economic crisis that has affected our country, and also especially because of the massive infighting that is going on between all political parties, if I may say so quite loosely. People continue to lose hope, and they continue to have this opinion about the political system here in Sri Lanka, that there is no hope. Everybody wants to get into political office just to earn a quick buck. That is at least the ground reality among the grassroots here in Sri Lanka. There are those with some form of hope, but at least the majority of people are exhausted, and rightfully so, after several turbulent years that our political leadership has failed to manage Sri Lanka properly. So, Professor G.L. Peiris, as a member who's been at the very top, what do you think is really happening right now, and where did we go wrong?
No, I agree with you that there is a very high degree of cynicism about politics and politicians. And you referred to some kind of internecine warfare among political parties and groups. But I think that there is a problem that is more fundamental than that. That is a war between the public and the government. That is somewhat unusual.
Okay.
I mean, watch the news every evening. What is striking is the distance that is increasing day by day. The concrete manifestations of it are suppression. Without exaggeration, every day there will be protests, there will be demonstrations, and the response to that will be water cannon, tear gas, baton charges, and so on. So this has become an everyday occurrence. Now, this is because of a total collapse of the social compact. People do not regard the government as representing their aspirations. I mean, look at the major sectors, look at the health sector. Bribery, corruption is nothing new. You referred to that. Right? But the scale of it, have we had a situation in our country where politicians in office have been happy to make money killing people? How many people died as a result of drugs being administered which had no therapeutic value, drugs which were not drugs at all? Right?
Well, what's really sad is certain people who went to the eye hospital to get some treatment for their eyes so that they can see better. They ended up blind.
So that's fine. That's what I'm telling you. So there is now a reluctance on the part of ordinary people without access to power and position and great wealth and so on. People who have to make use of the health state system. There is today a reluctance to go into a government hospital because they feel that they might leave the hospital far worse off than they were when they went there in the first place, no?
And do you think that fear is misplaced?
No, it is not, because about 50 people have died as a result of being given medicines which could not possibly have done any good at all. Now that's unusual. We haven't had that in our country before. Then look at the education system. As we speak, all the universities in the country are closed. Every university is closed. Right? So this is a recipe for youth unrest. People are at home, they are wasting the best period of their lives. And you said there is no hope. Yes, there is no hope because it's very unlikely that universities will reopen in the near future.
Because of the non-academic strikes.
Yes, because of non-academic strikes. And it's,
well, Professor, before we get into really how we can come out of this and then, of course, what's unfolding as far as the election goes, there are various ideas being mooted at the last moment, but people are quite jittery because you can't really say what will happen. We were preparing for a local government election last year until the last moment when ballot papers were printed and the elections were suspended all of a sudden. So people have that experience and they're wary about what's happening. But just before we get into that, just one final question on what's happening really right now. Now, you were the chairman of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna. Your party was given a massive mandate. The people were extremely hopeful that Sri Lanka will have good leadership. Finally, there was Wiyatmaga. Everybody really rallied around you. People came from overseas to cast their vote for your party, for your leader. As the chairman of the SLPP, where do you think it all went wrong?
It all went wrong because in August 2020, when the parliamentary election was held, the leader of the SLPP, the Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa, and I, as chairman of the party, we went all around the country.
Okay.
And we placed before the people a certain program of work, a certain agenda.
The vistas of prosperity and splendor.
Yeah. Then, after the SLPP decided to tie up with Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, we ended up doing the precise opposite of what we had undertaken to do. So there was a cynical departure from the solemn undertakings that we had given the people, on the basis of which we obtained a resounding mandate, 145 seats in a parliament of 225.
Never before in Sri Lanka.
Never before. So, that was not to go into parliament and do whatever we like. It was to implement a program for which we had received the explicit endorsement of the people. Now, did we tell the people that we would sell public assets, the insurance corporation, which is bringing considerable revenue into the state?
Sri Lanka Telecom?
Sri Lanka Telecom has another dimension that is not the financial dimension alone, but it has a significant impact on the country's security, undersea cables and so on. Right? So the insurance corporation was established during the time of the late Prime Minister Sirimava Bandaranaike, and a pioneer in that exercise was T.B. Langaratne, one of the prominent members of that government. So we all said in very emotional language, we are going to protect these assets for the benefit of posterity. Now, you're doing the exact antithesis of it. So we said, this is not the government that we promised to form. These are not the policies that we agreed to implement. In fact, no less than the Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa said that last week.
So are you implying to say that the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna is now out of the hands of Mahinda Rajapaksa also?
Well, I'm not really saying that. All I'm saying is that we are not playing fair by the people who elected us. Now, the parliament that is in existence even now is dominated by the SLPP. The president has only one member of parliament, right? So this is a huge distortion. It is unique, it is unparalleled in the history of democracy. Right? Now, let's be candid. He contested the general elections in August 2020. He was not able to win his own seat. I mean, political leaders in this country have won elections, they have lost elections. But nobody has lost their own seat, and it's not only that, and he was not able to get any member of his party elected from any part of Sri Lanka except the nationalist seat, right? So that is as unequivocal a rejection as you can imagine. There cannot be a clear
to end up as president after that.
Then, so the people said, we want you to go home, we want to, we don't want you to represent us, and please go home. And he went home, and he was at home for 10, 11 months.
Watching Netflix.
And then what happened next? He comes back, he's a prime minister, and then lo and behold, he's president of the country. Now that is an absolute caricature of the democratic process, for which, try hard as you might, you cannot find a parallel in any part of the world, from Athenian democracy a couple of thousand years ago, through the ages, through different civilizations. You cannot find anything to compare with that. Now, that is the reason for the total erosion of public confidence. This is not we voted for, this is not to our liking, right? So it is a superimposition. It is not an emanation from the will of the people. So what you have today is massive unhappiness, discontent. People are leaving in their thousands, young people in particular, to find greener pastures. Right, we've gone through crises. Don't forget, this country has a certain resilience, which has seen us through many calamities. 30-year war, COVID, tsunami, all of that. But today there is, as you rightly said, a loss of hope. Right? Now, this is because people express their grievances, their sense of despair. What is a reaction? Not empathy, not understanding, but repression. In the most brutal manner possible. Right? Why is that happening? Because there is no rapport, there is no connect.
There's no social contract.
Yeah, there's no social contract, and there's no connect or rapport between the government and the people. Now, an elected government which feels we are sitting here because the people put us here will have a totally different attitude. But this is not a government that the people elected. It is a government, it is a leadership which the people emphatically rejected. Right? And then they now, through a very strange combination of circumstances, they have to put up with a government which they simply do not want. And the government is imposing its will on the people, repression, and this is the reason why there is so much turbulence and a loss of confidence, not just in individuals, that's not such a serious problem, but a loss of confidence in the system itself, which is a far, far more worrying phenomenon.
Professor Peiris, just one final question. Having, done what you said that has been done by this government that is in power, came on a ticket on a different mandate of the general public, completely betrayed that mandate. Now, you were the chairman of the SLPP. What do you see as the future of the SLPP? Do you think these wrongs that you spoke of right now are reconcilable?
Well, it depends on the resolve of the party leadership to remain true to its ethos, its fundamental convictions, right, which they articulated.
You think they're still there?
Not as long as they continue an alliance with a party and a leader that stands for the very opposite of what they advocated to the people of this country. There you have a irreconcilable contradiction.
Do you think they'll support President Ranil Wickremesinghe at the presidential election?
Well, that's not for me to speculate on. That is, they have said that they are still considering the matter, and they will be making a final decision in due course. So that's a matter for the SLPP leadership.
You're no longer part of?
No.
Well, moving forward, we're speaking about a presidential election, but are you sure that a presidential election will be held somewhere in November?
No, but now that is exactly the problem. You see, that question you asked is not a question that would be asked in any democracy. Right?
But we're in Sri Lanka after all.
Yeah, exactly. That's, yes. I mean, nobody asked, is the Indian election going to happen? That's a given. It's taken for granted. The election is going to happen, and everybody in India, man, woman and child, knows when that election is going to happen. Right? Now, in the United Kingdom, okay, every 5 years you need to have a parliament election. It's compulsory by law. Now, you have the incumbent prime minister. He can go on until early next year. He could well have had a parliamentary election in the autumn. But he has chosen to have it in the first week of July. Right? So, these are fixed dates, systems and procedures. Elections on time. But if in a country people are left wondering, speculating, asking all the time, is an election going to happen or not at the time when it ought to happen by law? Right? Then there's something wrong. You see, nobody asks in any democratic country, okay, Parliament is elected not to remain, not to enjoy the benefits of power for as long as the holders of power determine. Now that's where we are in Sri Lanka today. You know, one stratagem after another, in the book or out of the book, simply to hold on to power.
But in reality, it's only on one previous occasion that this has really happened under the government of J.R. Jayawardena, where a referendum was held and the term of parliament was extended for another term. That was the only time in Sri Lanka, really, where the term of those elected to office were extended for as long as they wanted to. Would you agree with me? It's not happened yet.
No. But the two things are entirely different. There's no comparison. President Jayawardena did not duck a presidential election. He was not afraid to have the presidential election. He did not think of one trick after another to avoid or to postpone facing the people. He did have the presidential election, right? And he won it. By methods which are questionable. That is a different matter. But the election was held, right? And he won it, right? Then having won the election, he held a referendum to decide whether the parliament which existed at that time could go on for another 6 years. At that time, the duration of parliament was 6 years. So the referendum is a question that you put to the people. He didn't ask the people, do you want a presidential election or can I go on for another 6 years? He didn't ask, will you please give me the chance to rule you for another 6 years and to enjoy the benefits? So he did not do that.
No, this is what Palitharanga Bandara is proposing.
No, but President Jayawardena held the presidential election. He won it. And the referendum had to do with the tenure of parliament and not with the presidency. Right?
So your main concern is that now there is issue over the presidential election. That is your primary concern.
So the presidential election by law has to be held within a certain window between the 17th of September and the 17th of October this year. Right? That is mandated by law, the constitution and the applicable laws.
But I think really the confusion stems from the fact that you get the leaders in government, including the president himself, saying that elections will be held on time. The president goes to the cabinet, says elections will be held on time. He tells the prime minister tells the media that elections will be held on time. High-ranking members of government say that the election will be held on time. And then you get a senior member of the president's party himself, Palitharanga Bandara, coming and proposing something completely out of the ordinary. And then you sit and wonder, well, is this his private opinion or is the president trying to just test the waters? So what do you think is happening here?
Is there any sane person in this country who believes that Mr. Palitharanga Bandara made that remark off his own bat? He suddenly got this idea and he gave expression to it without any kind of reference to his leader, the current president. Do you or anybody else believe that that could possibly have happened? You said senior member of the party. He's more than a senior member of the party. He's a general secretary. The general secretary of the party has very special responsibilities.
Well, strange things have happened in Sri Lanka. One could say.
They have, but to my mind, it is totally incredible. And there's absolute credence which can be attached to the theory that Mr. Palitharanga Bandara got up one morning, had a bright idea which he wanted to share with the people of this country without any form of consultation with the president. The president got that statement made. That is the stark fact. And why did he do that? He was testing the waters. Right? It was a kite that he was flying. What kind of reaction would there be to this? Is there a chance of getting away with it? And it became painfully evident there wasn't a chance of a snowflake in hell, right? Because right across the political spectrum, right, parties that disagree with one another on almost everything, they found it possible to come to one conclusion on this matter. Everybody, bar none, there was not one single exception, everybody stridently rejected this and said, of course not, the elections have to be held on time, right? I mean, that is absolutely basic. I mean, look at Article 3 of Sri Lanka's constitution, which says, sovereignty is in the people. It is inalienable, and then it goes on to say what sovereignty consists of. And the last phrase in Article 3 is franchise. So franchise is an integral part of sovereignty in this country. Right? And what does franchise mean? Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe was never elected by the people of this country at all. Never, ever. Right? So he is serving out the remainder of Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa's mandate under Article 40 of the Constitution. That is, if a president resigns or dies in office, then Parliament meets to name his successor for the remainder of the term of his predecessor. Right? So it is very clear, had Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa been in office, his term would have ended before the 18th of November this year. You must have a presidential election. You can't strain credulity or ingenuity, what have you, to find ways and means of hanging on. You just can't, So that is the problem, and that is why there is this confusion. You go anywhere, any function, any boutique, any gathering of people, the one topic is, will the election be held? That is not a question that would be asked or a debate that would take place in any democracy worthy of its name. How can you call yourself a democracy if you don't hear? Now the reality in our country, these things are unbelievable. We haven't had provincial council elections for 5 years.
That's almost one term of a provincial council.
Right. And the president controls a whole lot through the governor. There have been elected presidents in this country.
There's no local government bodies.
There's no local government. 342 local government institutions are controlled by the president through the governor. Now, there have been, the executive presidency may be bad, people may be critical of it, but the fact remains that this country has had executive presidents who have won massive mandates. Gotabaya Rajapaksa with 6.9 million, Chandrika Kumaratunga polling, I think, 62.5% of the votes of the presidential election. None of them arrogated to themselves the power that Mr. Wickremesinghe is enjoying today.
So you're saying Mr. Wickremesinghe is technically, as far as textbook goes, the president who wields the most amount of power out of all.
Not the textbook, the reality of the situation.
The reality.
He wields far greater powers than any of his elected predecessors did, right? So we have to stomach it, we have to put up with it, but not forever. On the 18th of November, he becomes a usurper. Thereafter, his government is illegal, right? It cannot negotiate with the International Monetary Fund. The IMF cannot entertain him at all after the 18th of November. He must hold this election, right? He cannot appoint ambassadors, he cannot receive ambassadors, right? He cannot appoint governors, he cannot give orders to the armed forces. Why should you and I pay taxes to an illegal government?
So just trying to kind of think based on the experience that we had last year. As a media organization, we were preparing for an election, and we saw the Elections Commission coming out and saying that, there have been over 20 attempts to postpone the election, and up until the very end, even the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna maintained the position that we are ready for the elections will be held. They submitted nominations, all parties submitted nominations. So I'm just being cautious and posing this question to you. What if, by chance, we prepare for the presidential election and for some reason or the other, I believe there is a certain leeway given to the leaders of our country to come up with reasons, because the reason for the postponement of the local government election was that, I'm sorry, but we don't have money. There was no proof given saying that, this is the reason why we don't have money. But all of that aside, what I'm asking you is, if by chance some tactic is used and the presidential election is not held as constitutionally mandated, what will happen?
It's not a question that any of us are entitled to ask ourselves or to ask other people.
Is it unimaginable as to what will happen?
No, it is unimaginable in the sense that there is a sacred duty on the part of all of us to resist with all the vehemence at our command such an effort, right? You cannot say, then if you say there's money for everything except elections, that means that whether you hold an election or not depends upon the powers that be. You have a president who's also Minister of Finance, right? Then he directed that expenditure can be incurred by public officials and so on only on matters which has cabinet approval. He has to sign.
That are considered essential.
Essential. Who decides what is essential? He does, right? So if he in his wisdom believes that elections are not essential, elections shall not be held. You and I are deprived of our franchise, which we have enjoyed long before we got independence. We have enjoyed our franchise from 1931, the Donamo Constitution. But he decides that this is not essential under current circumstances and therefore the election is not held. Mind you, the Supreme Court, we went to court and the Supreme Court gave a binding order. The Supreme Court directed the Minister of Finance and the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance
to release the money.
To release the money which Parliament had allocated.
But nothing was done.
Yeah, nothing was done. So these are things that can happen.
I believe contempt charges were also filed.
Yeah, but these things can happen only in Sri Lanka, and the reason is the lack of vigor and vitality of public opinion. Can you conceive of such a thing happening anywhere else at all? So this election cannot be postponed. In fact, the 10 billion rupees required for the presidential election already been allocated. Right? Now, it is open to the president at any time to dissolve parliament. After 2.5 years, he can do that. So if parliament is dissolved and if there is going to be a parliamentary election, then under Article 150, Sub-Article 4, I think, of the Constitution, then he has to release money separately for the conduct of the parliamentary election. The money already allocated for the presidential election cannot be utilized in part or in whole for the conduct of a parliamentary election. So all of this no money to hold elections is a ridiculous argument. I mean, you are there for a limited period, and for heaven's sake, if you want to hang on, get the people to agree to that. Right? If the people say, no, we don't want you as president, we don't want you as a member of parliament even, you cannot hold on. If you do, it is a dictatorship. It is not a democratic government by any stretch of the imagination.
Professor Peiris, judging by what has happened right now, in hindsight, do you think the situation would have been better if former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa continued the remainder of his term?
I think that is a fruitless speculation. A situation arose in which he could not carry on. Right? So to his credit, he decided not to resort to violence against his own people. Right? He could have made the attempt to remain in office.
Use the military.
Yeah, he could have done that, right? But he did not. I mean, you have to give him that credit. He was not hungry for power in that sense. This attitude that is so prevalent now, you don't see in Gotabaya Rajapaksa. He said, I'm not going to shed blood of my own people. If they don't want me, I will go. Here you have a situation where how much people say they don't. What is a litmus test of whether you're wanted or not wanted? An election. Surely. That's common sense. Right? That is not law, it is not constitution. Right?
It's common sense.
Yeah, common sense. You ask the people whether they want you or not. If they want you, carry on 5 years, 10 years for the rest of your life. But if they don't want you, you cannot stay in office. How else do you interpret the rudiments of democracy?
Well, like it or not, President Ranil Wickremesinghe will continue to be in office at least, like you said, until
about 100 days approximately.
About another 100 days. Yeah. And a lot can happen in 100 days.
No, I think the Elections Commission gets the authority to declare the election
in about 40 days.
In about 41 days, right? That is to issue the proclamation.
Yes.
And I think the maximum period for which this government president can remain in office is approximately 117 days from today. That's it. That's it.
So in 117 days, a lot can happen.
Yeah, of course.
A lot can happen in 117 days. And let's take a look at what is in the pipelines right now. And it's imminent that these things would happen now. There was much opposition against the Sri Lanka Electricity Act, the new act that was passed in Parliament yesterday by a majority of about 44 votes,
44 votes, yes.
I believe. So there was much opposition to that. The bill was challenged in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's determination was that it's inconsistent with the Constitution. However, there were certain amendments that were being made, and those amendments were incorporated into the Act, and then it was passed into law. But then now there is an even more contentious piece of legislation, the Economic Stabilization Bill, I believe.
No, it's called the Economic Transformation Bill.
Economic Transformation Bill. I stand corrected, Professor. The Economic Transformation Bill. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor, but this piece of legislation kind of seeks to bring about certain constraints on Parliament's power to manage public finances, which is a power conferred on Parliament by way of the Constitution. So what really is the threat here? And within these 117 days, do you think that this piece of legislation will be passed into law and continue to bind future parliaments in Sri Lanka?
It cannot bind future parliaments. That is one of the basic principles of constitutional law. One parliament cannot bind its successor because each parliament has equal sovereignty and power, right? Now, this country will go to the polls, and we have to have a presidential election, and then soon afterwards a parliamentary election. So the people will elect a parliament of their choice to carry out a new agenda, not more of the same. But the Economic Transformation Bill contains provisions relating to how the economy should be conducted in 2032, 2040, and, believe it or not, 2050, by which time there would have been no fewer than 5 parliaments, right? Mr. Wickremesinghe and his government cannot control the next 5 or 6 parliaments. I mean, he's not God, he's not even an elected leader. So how can he do that? So it's impossible. Then the next parliament...
Well, his argument is that we are in such dire economic situation. We need to give assurances to the IMF, to our international creditors, to official creditors, to bilateral partners, and multilateral organizations that we will maintain some kind of financial discipline because we haven't been doing that.
That I entirely agree with, but you have to reconcile that with the basic postulates of democracy unless you want to abandon the entire democratic system. And
so how do you propose we do this,
now look at this. Now look at this. That if you read that piece of legislation, it creates an all-powerful ambassador for international trade. He will negotiate free trade agreements. He controls the entire field of international trade and all that. There is an Office of International Trade, very powerful. Who appoints these?
President.
Mr. Wickremesinghe. For how long? For 4 years. And then at the end of 4 years, these people can go on for another 4 years. They can be, they can be reappointed for another 4 years. So you're talking of an 8-year time span. Mr. Wickremesinghe's time span is 100 days. Does it make sense? Can a leader, a purported leader whose time span is 100 days, appoint at his will and pleasure key officials controlling the commanding heights of Sri Lanka's economy for 8 years when he doesn't have even 4 months? Does it begin to make sense? It does not, right? So then you have these structures that are brought into being. You have an economic commission at the apex of the structure. You have the Office of International Trade. You have an institution called Zones Sri Lanka. You have a National Productivity Commission. The composition of all of which is determined by the president, right? So these functions were performed by a variety of bodies, ministries, departments, corporations, and in some cases the people who were performing these functions had been selected on the basis of competitive examinations. They were first-class honors, second-class honors in the upper division. They were trained officials serving the state, permanent officials of the state, right?
But now it's anyone's baby.
No, now this gives the president the power to choose his own appointees. So it is a very powerful political authority, and there is every danger of decisions being made on political criteria, political favorites. I mean, look at the history of what has happened. It's very, very frightening. Now, we had very recently the VFS scandal. This was a service that was being rendered for $1. And now it's going to cost $25, right? The amount that was going to be siphoned off was for every year, each year, $46 million US, right? Now, immediately what springs to mind, the central bank fraud, which took place in 2015. There are very striking features in common between these two.
But your colleagues who were very vehemently against the central bank bond scam and who claimed that this is the biggest scam in Sri Lanka are now switch tune. Say, for example, Minister Shehan Sewasinghe, who is now the State Minister of Finance.
I can't speak for the Honourable Shehan Sewasinghe. He must speak for himself, right?
How they've changed their opinions.
So that he must answer that. I'm not an apologist for him. But what I was about to say is that there are features in common. Both of these happened on the eve of national elections, right? And there was a need to make money for election campaigns and so on. But
the bond scam was immediately after the election, though.
No, the parliamentary election was coming.
Oh, right, yes.
Parliamentary election was coming.
Just
right?
before the parliamentary.
Yeah. Then Mr. Wickramasinghe was then Prime Minister. He's now President. He was then Prime Minister. Right? Now you can check this. Within 72 hours, one of his first appointments was Mr. Aruna Mahendran as the Governor of the Central Bank. This was raised in Parliament. Right? And the question was directly asked, is it responsible on your part to appoint somebody who was not even a citizen of Sri Lanka, no dual citizen, nothing. He is not. He has no nexus with the Sri Lankan state. He is not a citizen, right? You're going to appoint him as the Governor of the Central Bank, one of the first appointments of the then Prime Minister, Ranil Wickramasinghe, right? Then, when this blew up in Parliament, he said, "I take personal responsibility. This is a good appointment. I have absolutely no doubt about that. There is no risk of anything untoward happening." So he said he was taking personal responsibility. What happened? Went away, right? Then he said, no, what's all the fuss about? He's gone to attend the wedding of a close friend.
And he never came back?
No, he's been attending the wedding for 9 years. And the loss to the people of our country, not to the people who
appointed him.
Not to the people who were prepared to give this certificate of probity and integrity and who said we are taking personal, not to them, not to their own pocket, but to the people of this country, 20,000 million Sri Lanka rupees. Now, against that background, I say, right, that there is a reasonable apprehension, right, that all these powers that are being taken over by the president, right? I mean, for heaven's sake, national elections are due in 3 months' time, right? The last 100 days to do all these things, a vast agglomeration of powers, right? There is at least a reasonable apprehension that these powers may be used in the way that some of these powers are used in the past. The very unsavory, the very disturbing track record in the past. So it is not fanciful, it is not imaginary, it is based on empirical experience of the past. Right? Nobody can say that there is no risk of the same thing happening again. We cannot afford to let the same thing happen again. That is why there must be controls, there must be checks and balances. You cannot have untrammeled, right, executive power in the hands of an unelected leader who wants to go on not holding elections, right? It is a dangerous situation, and if the country allows it to happen, well, then they deserve what they get.
Professor Peiris, we're in the final few minutes of the program. One final question to you. Now, you and several other parliamentarians who broke away from the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, became independent, have now aligned yourselves with the Samagijana Balavegaya. Now, there was a certain assurance given to the general public that, bright times are ahead, good times are ahead, when the government of Gotabaya Rajapaksa was brought into power. Now, are you in a position to give a similar assurance at this point of time that come the general election, come the presidential election, if Sajith Premadasa is appointed as president, the future of Sri Lanka will be a little better than what it is right now?
Yes, certainly. I think that degree of optimism is certainly justified. You see, the one sort of conspicuous characteristic of his recent activity is that without any semblance of government authority or patronage, he has been able to deliver to the people. It is not a question of just going and making mellifluous speeches and coming home, right? But he has now these different programs, the Sakpala program. You go to a school, you give the children something that will enrich their future.
But where does this money come from, if I may ask?
That question has been asked and answered. Everything is about, it's all by checks, audited accounts and so on. Not cash, not money under the table.
But where? From,
from the corporate.
Donors?
Yeah, donors, the corporate sector, people who feel for this country. And
so correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is if a person can accept donations from corporates, donors, and then give it to the general public, that is, prime qualification to become president?
No, not at all. I'm not suggesting that for one moment. I'm only saying that for the first time here is an opposition leader who felt that his only job was not to criticize everything the government does, but to contribute in whatever way he can without power to the well-being of the people. So you go to a hospital, you don't make a speech there about promises for the future, you deliver right now diagnostic equipment, CT scans, whatever, right? You go to school, you give smart classrooms, computers, right, which are going to make a definite impact on their futures. So you are doing, then people are beginning to, well, if he's able to do all of this without any authority at all, if he is heading a government, would he not be able to do more, right? And there is, you see, and also there is feeling for the people. Now, all these boastful statements about an economic miracle. What is a miracle if 500,000 school children have to leave school because their parents cannot afford to give them the basic things to go to school? What's the economic miracle if 900,000 people have lost their livelihoods? What's the economic miracle if poverty has doubled in 2 years and today child malnutrition is running at approximately 27%? There's real suffering. You believe it or not, you go to a pharmacy, you go to a grocery. People who have never ever begged in their lives, right? They're not rich people, but they've not been a burden on society. Today they're forced to beg and they're humiliated, they're embarrassed about it. They come and tell you, sir or madam, we are not asking for money. Please buy me some vegetables to make some soup for my child. Buy me some rice. We are hungry, right? This situation never arose in this country. That is the degree of anguish and suffering which the people are undergoing. So if that is the case, simply to raise taxes and balance the books, right? Pay at 36%, company tax at 30%, VAT at 18%. There is a limit to the capacity for human endurance. Okay. All of us may realize...
we are at different levels, but there is a cap.
Yeah, no, rationally you realize that you have to make sacrifices, but there is a limit to the sacrifices. You have to feed your child, right? You have to send your child to school. You
have to give them proper medicine.
Yeah. But are we giving them proper medicine? So those limits...
But we're giving them medicine, but whether or not they're proper, I can't tell you, I'm sorry.
Are you giving them medicines that will make them well or that will kill them? 50 people have been killed, right? So you have transgressed that limit of human endurance. And that is not an economic miracle, nor is it an achievement to be proud of.
Well, thank you very much, Professor G.L. Peiris, for coming on the show and, of course, clarifying these matters to the general public. The general public continue to be more and more watchful of Sri Lanka's political leadership, given the situation that we're in right now. And I believe Professor Peiris would also agree with me that, come the election, hopefully, I think Professor G.L. Peiris is quite hopeful that the election will be held for sure.
It must be held. It must be held
by mid-November. Yeah. Even once the election is held, post-election, I believe Professor G.L. Peiris would also agree with me that, as he quite rightly said, the sovereignty rests with the people, and it's also up to the people to make sure that their sovereignty is exercised in good faith by the leaders that they themselves have elected. Thank you very much, Professor G.L. Peiris, once again for joining us on our program. Thank you very much to all our viewers out there for tuning in to another episode of Face to Face. Of course, as I always remind you at the end of the program, it's our responsibility to give you credible information so that you can make an informed choice at the upcoming election for the betterment of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for watching once again. Take care and God bless.